Welcome back to Doing Diaspora. I'm delighted to be joined by Joyce Sarpong today, based out of the UK. Joyce is a longtime friend, colleague, and one of our greatest connections is through a mutual friend, and the greatest connection is Tottenham Hotspur. We'll come back to that later. So Joyce is an entrepreneur with a background in IT, project management and consultancy. She has over 20 years of business IT consultancy, project management experience working in the public and private sector. She's the founder and director of Africa Oracle, which is an incredible organization that curates memorable and meaningful experiences to promote brands. She narrates stories to amplify the voices of Africa and its diaspora by celebrating people who have made an impact. She's currently working on an initiative to create an institution that will serve the BAME community in the UK and address the inequalities they face. She is a visiting lecturer with the Business School of University of Westminster, where she lectures on entrepreneurship and marketing. She's also received many awards and recognitions over her long and distinguished career. She was a comic relief African diaspora changemaker, one of 100 key African leaders selected for her achievement in development work in the UK and Africa. As part of her work with Africa Oracle, she has secured funding from Innovate UK, the government's innovation agency, which has allowed her to collaborate with Kingston University to create stories that change the narrative about Africa. As a part of her family, the Sarpongs, they have also set up a charity in Ghana that has supported over 100 children, a number who have gone on to university education. She continues to volunteer her time to support this foundation. Joyce, it's great to have you. How are you, first and foremost?
I'm great. Thanks for having me, Martin. How are you doing?
I'm good. We're in Ireland. The barbers are open, so I'm going to get a haircut soon.
That's why I haven't been to the hairdressers yet, hence my...
So Joyce, look, we came across each other a couple of years ago. I think it was actually at the Comic Relief event at the ODI in London a few years ago.
Yep.
And I remember you were asking me questions that I didn't have the answers to, so I said I better get to know this lady. So, what we saw from the introduction, and that was only a snapshot of your background. You have an incredibly rich and diverse kind of public and private sector experience of diaspora engagement. But most importantly, what's really exciting to me, and I think the audience, is your own journey and your journey to Africa Oracle. And I guess the natural question to kick off with is, as an entrepreneur, what really drew you to the area of diaspora engagement?
Well, thank you, Martin. So I have to be honest, my background, as you've said, has been in IT and corporate. And so I did that for almost 20 years. And really had no knowledge of the diaspora. Obviously, I am British-born Ghanaian of African heritage, and that was the be-all and end-all. I didn't really understand that diaspora existed until 2014, when Comic Relief had this call out for African leaders in the UK diaspora, and I was fortunate to be selected as one of 100. So that was when I actually started to hear about the diaspora world and about this thing called the third sector, which I knew nothing about, being in the private sector myself. And then came across, a wide, diverse range of people of African background like myself. And I'd have to say that the only thing that was common amongst us was the fact that we had our African heritage. I was amongst people who had come over as refugees, people who'd come over to study or simply to work in the UK. And that was very interesting because we all had different backgrounds and worked in a completely different way. So it was a bit of I'd say a culture shock actually at the time. It felt like it was this underworld that existed that I didn't know ever existed. So that was my first time.
It's amazing you say that in the sense of an underworld, and the conversation will meander, so stick with me.
Okay, I will.
In a sense, it's a remarkable point of your story that it took that initiative to almost, let you know that this was out there. The whole the diaspora world, and particularly the third sector. I suppose the natural question is, how are you finding it? Are you enjoying it? Is it a challenge?
Well, the thing is, I'm enjoying it because it brings my passions to the fore. So I'm very passionate about Africa and my heritage. And diaspora people like to contribute or have links with their places of heritage. So it's bringing all of that to the fore, which is great. But with that comes a lot of challenges. It's a very sort of disparate sector. And so it's very difficult to sort of gain traction. And people don't really understand fully, what the value is of the diaspora, or what the role is, or what we're trying to achieve. So you're always having to sort of explain yourself. But it's exciting and challenging because the opportunities are great. And, they're great actors, people that I've met, including yourself, Martin. So it's a wonderful space to be in, but it's challenging at the same time.
Very well said. And if you're hanging around with me, you're in trouble. You know that.
I think I know that.
I probably wear the Irish badge of troublemaking on my sleeve. I want to kind of disentangle a couple of things that you said about being British, Ghanaian, and you've been in and around. Whilst you've come to the diaspora sector, if you want to call it that, over the last kind of 5-10 years, maybe since the award and recognition, you have been in and around the community at a very simple humane level in terms of humanity, in terms of many years. So over the last 15-20 years, not just in the UK community you've been part of, but that wider African community, you must have seen incredible changes in that. So I'd love to pick your brains on some of those changes, good and bad.
Okay. The first thing that comes to mind when I think about the changes is, I remember back in at the turn of the millennium, 2000, The Economist had this front page, Africa, the hopeless continent. And that was a bit of a shock, because I have ties back in Ghana and I travel there quite often. Yes, there are challenges, but to have the front cover of The Economist labeling a whole continent as the hopeless continent, that was like a bit harsh, I felt at the time. But I think the reason for that was the fact that Africa is always perceived as a place that needs help and aid back then, and so it's always people always looking to go and see what they can do to help help Africa. So I think that at the turn of the millennium was still the case. Obviously, 20 years on, things are different. So within the UK, for example, Boris Johnson has said that DFID no longer exists. So it's now become part of the Foreign and Commonwealth Office. And I think that's a sign. And prior to that, to be fair, a lot of African countries were saying, we don't need aid. We just need to, develop ourselves, kind of thing. So I think the timing is right. 20 years later, there's been a lot that's said about African remittances. So as a community, we remit a lot to family and friends. That's often not in a strategic way. So I think that's one of the issues with remittances. Even though it's large sums of money, it's 3 times that of aid that Africans in diaspora remit back to the continent. So it's of value, but it's not strategic. So I think that that's where now the shift is going, in terms of how can the diaspora be more strategic.
It's fascinating you say that, because it'll take us nicely to Africa Oracle in a moment, because what I love about Africa Oracle is the idea of amplifying and celebrating voices of the African diaspora. Because if you think back to that front page of The Economist, and I say this as somebody that has worked across Africa, most of when I walk into Africa, I'm probably the least intelligent person in the room. So the answers are there, and a sense of shifting that from that aid mindset, and something that makes me a little bit nervous in the diaspora world more generally, for example, is that the entry point to the debate is often remittances, because it's a big number. When you look at the official remittances, you're looking at about 600 billion. with unofficial remittances or informal remittances, however you want to call it, probably close to $1 trillion industry, 3 or 4 times the size of ODA. You know, how do we become more strategic? We can come to Africa Oracle in a moment, because I think the beautiful point now is to talk about how does the diaspora become more strategic? And the second follow-on question is, who makes it more strategic? In many ways, is it the government? What's the role of government? Is it civil society organizations? Is it the private sector? Is it a blend of everything? So I'd love to unpack, because you've worked in all those areas. So I'd love to get your sense on that.
I think that probably for too long, the diaspora has been waiting for governments to sort of step up and offer that strategic vision. But I think that the power really is with the diaspora. And so the diaspora, we need to mobilize ourselves and, you know, make sure that we sort of are able to define who we are. So we need to know all the main actors within the diaspora space, who we are and what we do, and then what kind of skills and experiences and knowledge we can impart. So I think once we have that foundation, the government sort of comes in to act as like a facilitator and to sort of match, you know, what the value of the diaspora in terms of its skills and experiences with their needs and and what their priorities basically. So as I'm saying that, it's almost reminding me of, because I'm involved in education quite a bit, and I have 4 teenagers, and I'm thinking of it in a school kind of setting where you have a PTA, so Parents Teacher Association, and then you have the school senior management. And so what happens is that the PTA ordinarily runs events and raises funds for the school. But then the school needs to think about, okay, what are the priorities? What do we need? So that when the funds are there, how are we going to make use of those funds? So I think in the same way, you know, the governments and the nations they do know what their priorities are, which sectors and which areas need more focus. And then it's for the diaspora to sort of mobilize themselves and be more organized, and then you know, when the needs come, then we know how that's going to be matched.
So let's take the African diaspora in the UK as a bit of a case study here. You know,
Okay.
and I say this as somebody that's been in and around it, but very much from the outside. You know, and one of the things that makes me nervous is that diaspora organizations try to be everything to everyone. You know, so when you come to that point of, you know, organizing and being strategic, I'm a big believer from all walks of my background that, you know, if one organization or one group of individuals are good at one thing, you leave them at that, and you come in. You know, I think that's part of that kind of missing ingredient. Do you this might bring us to Africa Oracle in a moment, but do you see, you know, any missed opportunities in the community in the UK or the African diaspora lens in the UK in terms of, you know, what's missing to make it that more strategic or to organize themselves? I don't know if that's a fair question or.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I think that what's missing is a lot of the challenges that the diaspora faces is to do with funds, you know, capital to make things happen. So that's where the focus, you know, needs to be as well, in terms of we need to have the institutions in place, not merely diaspora-led institutions to be, you know, working on developmental projects, but we need to have the financial muscle in order to fund, you know, the initiatives that needs to come about, because often enough government is not going to provide those funds. So we need to find a way of, whether it's through you know, philanthropy, or whether it's through you know, having businesses that are able to invest in initiatives, whatever it is, we just need to get to that point where we can finance some of these things.
So So the tough question, how do we do it? Right? In many ways, look, because you and I have spoken, numerous times over the last couple of years, particularly on the whole area of diaspora philanthropy, but also the role of the private sector in all this.
Yes.
And I think, no matter what lens or walk of life you come from, I think the tragedies of the last few months, and particularly the tragedies in the US that have impacted how diversity and inclusivity is seen, in the US, but I think that's coming transatlantic with what the scenes in London and different parts of the UK. So, I was listening to a session run by an incredible organization, the African Diaspora Network in Silicon Valley, and there was a great speaker a couple of weeks ago. She said, look, make no mistake, we have a very short window here. So my thinking in this is that this is the African diasporas in the UK and globally, this is the moment. And this will define the course of activity and investment and everything you talk about. So if we take those two areas to begin with, diaspora philanthropy and, then diaspora in corporates, if you want to talk about it, or corporate philanthropy and the role of diasporas in that, where do you see that coming out in the UK discussion? Is it happening behind closed doors? Are the right people around the table? How do you see that kind of playing out?
Okay, so in terms of diaspora in the corporate, I think the voices are starting to be heard more there. So since the dreadful killing of George Floyd in the US, which then sparked all the protests and the Black Lives Matter movement, I hear that a lot of corporates, what they're doing is they're listening more. So they're listening to their diverse workforce and trying to understand what has been happening. It's actually been a bit shocking, because what seems to be obvious to one group didn't seem to be obvious or visible to another group. So, but nevertheless, the fact that the dialogue is happening is a good thing. So in corporates, I understand that that's happening. Right. And then with that, there needs to be, it can't just stop at the dialogue. There needs to be action. So I think the corporates need to they will have their diversity and inclusion initiatives or objectives. But to have that sort of standing alone would not be adequate. So they need to sort of marry that with their business objectives, and then, and then take action, or have some strategic actions or whatever to do. So I think that's hopefully will be like a natural progression. There are these diversity and initiative, inclusion objectives. For example, if a business wants to enter into a certain part of the world, let's say that they wanted to have more of a presence in Africa. Not too far-fetched, because unfortunately the UK is coming out of the EU at the end of this year, and naturally...
No comment.
Okay. And looking for some trade agreements. The diaspora are like natural ambassadors, right? Where like we have this art of diplomacy, because we straddle both worlds. And so so to align like their diversity and inclusion objectives with their business objectives means that, when they're entering new markets, because the governments will do their agreements at the high level, but then on the ground is the people that's going to do the work. And so in order for that to happen smoothly, there needs to be that the understanding or whatever have you, and the diaspora can bridge the gap there. So I think it can happen on that front with the corporates, but then also we can't forget about the youth. So the youth are the future, and in order to make an impact, the corporates need to start thinking about, okay, if we want the institutions to be more, to reflect society in a better and fairer way, we need to engage the young people earlier on. So we can have, they can have some of their employees, doing mentoring, acting as role models. The corporate offer internships. And then once they've sort of got that relationship going with the youth, when it comes to, employment or careers, there's a graduate training schemes. And then the young people will be, more aware of some of these institutions, and it won't be like a big ask for them to be looking for employment. So I think, having those links with schools, and also because educational institutions are also having they're opening up in terms of diversity and inclusion sort of initiatives, there could be that kind of conduit where corporate goes in to give talks to schools, other people coming to corporates, cross sectors to share information and to share best practices. So that's how I see the corporate world evolving.
Look, incredibly well said. I think, what I heard as you were speaking, in many ways is, the opportunity now is to really look at the system change, from where it begins, and it begins in schoolyards, it begins back that far, and that's part of the opportunity, but part of the nervousness as well, is, when you look in from afar and you hear big numbers, it's quite appealing, to be working in this area at the minute. You hear 100 million from this company, 400 million from this company, The big question is, so what? What are you going to do with it? But I think if you can, and I think hopefully, look, I'll share a story of hope with you. I won't mention the company, but I remember a couple of years ago when it's easily found out when I tell the story, but I won't mention the company. I remember
I haven't clocked it. I'll pretend that I didn't.
Look, about 10 years ago, when I was at the university, we were organizing a conference on diaspora and development in Dublin. And we got funding from a very prominent company, and I thought I was a whiz kid at fundraising, all of a sudden. So I went to London, flew down as a thank you to the person who funded me, and I said, well, why did you fund me? It was a bit of a long shot, in the sense of going after it. When they were looking to break into Africa, she said the funding was a thank you to our African employees and our African diaspora employees. They were the ones that gave us the true read of the lay of the land, and who to work with. So it's been happening probably informally and probably way too sporadically. But I think if you can put some structure on that, because I think the reason I said incredibly well said is that, there'll come a moment when you talk about the short window where the impact on the bottom line will come to bear. But I think you used the word earlier that I think relates to it incredibly well. And I'd love to unpack it a little bit more, because it's a really important word, and the word is power, right? And power is still important. And you mentioned diasporas have power. Diasporas also have incredible buying power, and they have incredible community power, buying power, everything that goes with it. And what we've seen during the pandemic, for example, is that levels of trust in public and private institutions, whether they're companies, governments, is at an all-time low. And consumers are watching these companies, and they're seeing how they're acting, and it's a whole reframing of capitalism. So I think you're speaking to that. So I guess my bigger question is, we get a sense of the community power, the buying power. Do you see any other type of power that diaspora communities have? Because I think it's important to say that we are powerful.
Yes, and I like that. So community power and buying power. The other power that I see is soft power. So soft power is about, your ability to sort of negotiate and influence. And I think the mere fact that the diaspora straddle two worlds means that they have a natural ability to do that. And you mentioned that the company that, said they were saying a thank you to their African employees is because they paved the way. They've got the networks here and there. And so that's a powerful sort of ammunition or skill set that we need to harness.
Interesting you say that, because here's the punchline, right? it's very hard to go anywhere online or one central point where you hear those stories, right?
Yes.
I have thousands of them, right? Whether, and not just African, you know, whether they're from the Balkans, whether they're from Asia, we hear these stories on the road. So when you talk about amplifying and celebrating the voices of the African diaspora through Africa Oracle, was that part of the mandate? Or is there something bigger in terms of where you think this should go in terms of?
That's an interesting question. Well, I mean, to me, it was just an obvious progression in that, you know, because of how the perception of Africa, the narrative, and the West sort of looking at how they report about Africa. The natural progression was to sort of counterbalance that with more African voices and stories. And so, yeah, so that's what Africa Oracle has done that in the past, but is looking to do more of in the future, because I think, like you said, this is now a powerful moment where we've got this window of opportunity, and we need to sort of you know, leverage that and then make these voices be heard.
So let me pick your brains for the people that are listening to this, you know,
okay.
We've touched on the role of corporates, we've touched on diversity and inclusivity, the diaspora moment. You said something at the beginning that stuck with me, you know. You see opportunities in this sector, you know, particularly the third sector, but also with your private sector hat on and experience, you know. Without question, because of what's happened over the last couple of months, there'll be a lot of people sitting in their front offices or front rooms or kitchens that are now offices or anything that goes like that, and probably thinking about, you know, I want to start a third sector organization on diaspora. I want to start maybe social enterprise. I want to trying to be a change maker, you know, and you've done that throughout your career. Do you have any advice for them? You know, what have you learned along the way, good and bad? You know, we're always open to a bad story.
Okay. What have I learned along the way? So, if you're an entrepreneur, let's say, and you know you're starting off, a lot of the diaspora tend to be entrepreneurial. I would say that the starting point, you really, I feel that diaspora, we need to share, you know, what we've learned. So that's number one. But in terms of other practical things to be doing, is we need to build our networks. Because I think at the beginning I said that, you know, where the diaspora groups and peoples are quite disparate. So we need to build more on our networks, because once we have these strong networks, we can build teams, right? So part of the challenges of an entrepreneur is, you know, how do I create a team? Often it's one or two people, they have an idea. How do we go to the next level? If you look, what I've learned is that rather than thinking, okay, there'll come a point when I have enough money and then I will be able to employ people, I have learned the hard way that often if you look hard enough in your network, you'll find the team there. So that's my number one. And also, if you have this strong network, as a startup, you need to have some initial funds for your startup. And family and friends and your network would be the initial, because you can't just go straight to an investor when you haven't got any sort of proof of concept, you haven't got, you know, a minimum viable product. So by looking into your network for your initial funding, that's also helpful. And then the second thing I'd say would be research. Now, often when people think about research, you think, oh my gosh, you have to commission somebody to do the research. That's going to cost money, you know, don't really have the funds. But you can do some quite simple research by what I'd call like a sensing journey. So maybe you turn up at a meeting or at a conference, or these days a Zoom or a whatever webinar, and you know, especially if it's connected to a particular sector, you're doing a lot of listening. and you might participate, but that's research. You're gathering information and you're gathering data. So, and then you can follow that up with maybe some of the participants that you've met, and then do some, more in-depth kind of research there. So research is very important. It doesn't have to be a big, commissioned research project. And then the third thing I'd say is that if you're a startup and you're looking at, creating services or products, you really have to design them. So have a bit of design thinking in there, because businesses are designed, and so products are also designed. And at the same time, you also have to put whoever your customer is at the center of what you're designing. Because otherwise, what you're doing is you're just offering a solution. And even if you're merely working on a project, you really have to think about the key stakeholders, rather than thinking about, what am I offering them? Because your solution might not be tailored to their needs. And so by putting the stakeholders or the users or the customer at the center, you're thinking about what is it that they need, and then thinking, okay, so how can I offer whatever they need? So I think that's also important. And then, as you're going along, you have to make sure you've got the right business model, and along with that, and thinking about the needs, the right value proposition. So what are you offering? What's the value in what you're doing? And then, whatever it is you're doing as well, you can look at it from what's the minimum version of this thing, your minimum viable product that I can use to demonstrate that this is what we're doing. So all those elements, I think, are things that are critical in terms of, advice. And then once you've got all those things in place, and you can then look for other forms of funding or investment. But the networks are the key.
Oh, look, I want to speak to that in a moment, but first of all, I want to say it's incredibly rich. Thank you. I mean, for any young entrepreneurs, they should have just listened to the last 2 or 3 minutes. I think it's a year of mentoring with me. But look, I'll probably get in trouble for saying this, but I'll say it anyway. Part of what we need to shift in diaspora work is the culture of it. And what I mean by that is, a lot of diaspora work tends to be what I say warm and fuzzy.
Yeah.
We want to change the world, kumbaya, sitting around the campfire kind of stuff. But I think there's a need to take that strategic, entrepreneurial, hard-nosed entrepreneurial look at it, and say, who are the organizations out there that are doing this well? And the one thing I have to say, Joyce, and I commend you on this, is you always turn up for the sector. You practice what you preach. I remember seeing you in the room for the Scottish Business Network for the Comic Relief event. That's hard work, people don't see that side of it. So look, I thank you for that, and I commend you on it. So look, let's talk about networks, because it's probably one of the, and I say this as somebody that's an advisor at the Networking Institute, so we have self-interest in this. But look, it's probably, again, one of the most powerful words out there at the moment in terms of networks and networking, but B, probably one of the most overused words out there in terms of doing it. So I would say to you, you've given some tips on how you do it well, but how important is it, do you think, to be training people in networking, and to really be, because what we see is, coming back to your role in education as well, and where education will be in the future, not just schools, but universities as well. Universities, the type of skills that kids need to survive and thrive nowadays are different to doing an international relations degree 15 years ago, So I'd love to get your idea on that networking piece, and the design thinking piece, I think, is important. So I'd love to just kind of unpack, getting a sense, not just a minimum viable product, but, a lot of people feel uncomfortable in that design thinking because they can see it in their head, but they can't see it in action. So do you have any tips for people in that sense?
Okay, so in terms of design thinking, it's really about, you know, just is understanding the needs of the your user or your customer. And at the heart of that is empathy. So you need to empathize with the user in their environment and think about what it is that they actually need, and sort of take out, you know, don't go in there talking about what you're doing, do more listening. So I think that's at the crux of design thinking, in that you're really just trying to observe and understand. You go there discovering what the customer can do or what their needs are. And once you've done the discovery piece, then you can look at defining what their challenges or their problems are. And then once you've defined it, then you will design. And then after the design stage, you go to implementation. So there are lots of different phases. And when you break it down into the different phases, then it's not so daunting, I find.
Very well said. And the networking and the training, this is self-interest.
Yeah. So in terms of the networking, I mean, networking is just something that I do. I enjoy meeting people. And I think enjoying being with people is at the heart of networking, but it's also a strategic skill. So I would say that, you know, it is very important for building, you know, your community, and also to have a sense of having a lot of information, gathering information as well. When I go to events, you know, I look for people that I have some sort of connection with. So often I might think, okay, I'm going to an event. I don't think I'll know anybody. But then by, you know, having conversations, and so it's not being afraid to you know, take that step to start talking to people, having the conversations, you will find the connections. And then once you found the connections, you have to build on that. So I normally, you know, connect with them on LinkedIn, and then, you know, follow it up the next day. And then you just build on that, because, you know, you have, if you look at your circle of influence or whatever, you will have your close friends or close network. And then the people that you tend to meet on the periphery or at events, they might not be, you know, people that you deem to be close to you, but they are critical because they give you the information, they give you the knowledge that helps you to sort of break down any barriers that you might feel in a certain sector or in a certain way, and therefore giving you that kind of confidence and ability to then, you know, keep going or pursuing whatever it is you're doing. So if I can give an analogy, I love to play tennis, and during lockdown, obviously most places were closed, and, you know, the tennis club was closed, but thankfully tennis club was one of the first things that opened up about 3 or 4 weeks ago. And, you know, when I go and play tennis, a lot of the people, because I play during the day, first thing in the morning, a lot of them are mothers, let's say. But, you know, we can have conversations about what's happening in the, you know, in the schools and in the education sector. And it's that kind of sharing of information. Not only that, you know, I might meet some of them sort of work from home, and we might talk about business and then pick up some tips there. So the same thing with the diaspora. You know, if we have this network where we can connect with people, it might be informal, you know, might not be somebody that you pick up the phone and call every day, but when you do meet, you can exchange and you can build upon the kind of information.
Incredibly well said. And I think for me, what I learned kind of growing up as a working class kid and going into universities where I felt a bit out of my depth, you know, to be quite frank, is that by building networks, you get access to formal information, but also informal information. that can tell you where to look. And I think, even if you think back to the story of how we met, a mutual friend that we have, Albert Tucker, that first event, the Comic Relief, I've no doubt you followed up with me because you didn't have a clue what I was saying with my accent, but
I struggle sometimes, Martin, but never mind. I think I'm doing well.
It's part of the brand, but look, and that's it. You can have a word with Albert and vice versa, and get that information on people. So look, you mentioned you were 4 teenagers, so I don't want to take too much of your time before they come rushing in and causing trouble.
They'll be really around.
Look, let's finish back on the diaspora lens, and most importantly, Africa Oracle, and what you're up to now with Africa Oracle, what you'd like to be involved with Africa Oracle, and more broadly, when I did the first one with Kingsley, he asked me the final question of the crystal ball. Where do you see this going in kind of 3 to 5 years? So first of all, Africa Oracle, what's it up to? Second of all, where are you going in the future with it? And thirdly, then more broadly, the sector.
Okay, so at the moment, what we're working on is we're looking at, we're in the tourism sector, travel and tourism. Africa is well endowed with natural resources and tourism destinations, but when you talk to people, they will list a handful of places, if that. So South Africa for safari, Kenya for safari, Gambia possibly, of course Egypt, and 1 or 2 North African countries. That's it. There are 54 nations and a diverse range of tourism destinations. And it all goes back to the narrative and the media as well in terms of the perception. But the reason why I've picked tourism is because tourism is like the second largest GDP earner for economies. It's huge. 1 in 10 jobs is often in the tourism and hospitality sector. Africa by 2050, I think, or thereabouts, will have the largest workforce, meaning the largest number of youth and people, needing employment. So there's a natural fit in terms of promoting and growing the tourism sector. And so that's where our efforts have been. We've been working with the Tanzanian Tourism Board. I think 3 years ago now, we worked with them on their international marketing strategy. And so that really was the catalyst for us, to do more work in that sector. And prior to lockdown, I had been working with Kingston University. I'm trying to marry my passion for tech and Africa together. And I found something that I can get my teeth into in terms of looking at promoting African destinations using immersive technology, meaning virtual reality and so on and so forth. So we did a prototype with some students from the University of Kingston, and at the moment we've applied for funding to see if we can do some research and then develop some virtual tools. So that's a big area. And in terms of how that relates to diaspora engagement, diaspora, Africa Oracle, is looking at building networks and initiatives as well. So in embarking into this space of tourism and hospitality sector, we would need to, build networks and partnerships basically to deliver what we're looking to build. So definitely it'll be diaspora led. So that's the tourism sector. And then secondly is to do with the diaspora stories that we've been talking about. So now is the opportune time to amplify the voices that are being listened to and heard. And so we'll be looking at creating a series of podcasts and talking to some key diaspora individuals and organizations and entrepreneurs, just to listen to their story and gain some insights into how they do what they do. So that's that. And then in the not too distant future, hopefully we will then create an African Diaspora Club, and we look to create a number of events and just, connect people and to celebrate, basically. Yeah.
It's incredible, and look, I've had the privilege of learning from you, Joyce, over the last couple of years. So thank you for that. And I know the ideas and the passions behind the club. So I would encourage everybody listening to this to reach out to Joyce, because first of all, I want to be part of it, because I know where it's going. You know. So look, it's genuinely an exciting project, and I think, look, it links into everything that we've discussed over the last kind of 40 to 45 minutes. And I think for the UK, but more broadly as well, globally, it's what's needed for the African diaspora. So look, I commend you on the courage of that. As always, count me in. You know, look,
I will do.
I mightn't be of any use, but I'll hang around.
Will do, Martin, for
look,
sure.
Most importantly, Joyce, you know, how can people reach out to you? How can people get in touch? You know, because we want people that are on these series to get the benefit of it. So what's the best way to get in touch?
Okay, so Africa Oracle has a website, very simple, africaoracle.com, and there's a contact us section. You can reach us there. I'm on LinkedIn, Joyce Sarpong, or as Africa Oracle. Similarly on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. So social media and the website.
Joyce, is there anything we haven't discussed that you would like to discuss? This is just ask me anything.
Oh, wow. Actually, yes, the question about the involvement of government in diaspora engagement.
Yeah. We kind of touched on it earlier when you were talking about, you know, when diasporas collectivize themselves and governments come in to facilitate. So,
yes, we did.
So do you see, because look, we do a lot of work with governments, you know, and part of it is from to my end, you know, the governance of the policy itself and the implementation of it. You very rarely see the diaspora around that table, you know. So
yeah.
we have a phrase that, you know, you should never be talking at the diaspora, you need to be talking with them, you know, because that's where all these bumps come up. So look, feel free to, in the tennis analogy, return serve, you know. I see it as facilitation. But so what do you see as the role of government?
Yeah, no, you're right. Definitely, you know, I think the missing piece is that, you know, often these policies are drawn up without the involvement of the diaspora, which is a crying shame. So if that's how they're developed, fair enough. But, you know, we need to understand what they are and how it's going to benefit us, because I think ultimately there needs to be a mutual benefit in all of this.
Yeah, well,
and the governments, whether it's through the embassies or diaspora organizations within government, they need to be communicating about what the opportunities are. But that being said, as I said earlier, the diaspora also, we need to be diaspora led, and diaspora needs to organize themselves so that we understand, you know, who we are and what our skills and experiences are, so that when these opportunities come, we're able to have that match. So, you know, both sides.
Completely agree. Look, Joyce, I think you've proven over the last 40 to 45 minutes that the African diaspora world needs a lot more Joyce Sarpong. So look,
Steady.
Yeah. Look, I think genuinely keep going. You're on the cusp of something that's so important right now. So look, count us in for any help that's needed. Thank you for your time. You know, if there's anything we can do, you know where we are, and you'll find me at the top.
Thank you, Martin. It's been a pleasure.
Have a great day, Joyce. Thanks.
And you. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.